We are happy to welcome back to our studio the 21st Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin, also the founder of the Martin Aboriginal Initiative, which is why you're here today and why we want to talk to you. Welcome back.
Well, it's good to be back.
Pleasure to see you again. Now, former Prime Ministers, I don't have to tell you, can basically involve themselves in whatever they want to once their careers are over. You chose this Aboriginal Initiative. How come?
Well, I think that it's probably the single most important social issue that we have as a country. I also think it's a very important economic issue. And I think that really, if we talk about our values, I think it's the issue which really reflects our values in as negative a way as it possibly could. The fact is that to think that there is a segment of our population, the youngest and the fastest growing, that is living a quality of life substantially less, receiving less funding for education, for healthcare, for welfare, that's just wrong. It's morally wrong, and it's a moral issue, and I think that we've got to address it.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is this a ticking time bomb?
Well, in terms certainly of the, when the youngest segment of your population is not receiving the same kinds of education that other people are receiving in this country, the same kind of health care that others are receiving, you're certainly buying yourself a lot of trouble if you don't address it. But I really do believe that, that before we talk about the economy, before we talk about ticking time bombs, we Canadians really do believe in fairness. We believe in equity, and that we're at odds with those values in terms of the way we treat Aboriginal Canadians. I just don't think that Canadians, if they understood it, would stand for it.
You've got two things that we want to talk about here today in your efforts to level the playing field here, and let's talk about those. First, CAPE, the Capital for Aboriginal Prosperity Entrepreneurship Fund, the CAPE Fund. What is that?
Well, before I went into government, I engaged in a leveraged buyout. I bought the company that I was working for. A young fellow came up to me one day and he said, Mr. Martin, how did this ever happen? And I said, well, I was mentored in the business, and when the time came, I borrowed the money from the bank and I bought the company. And he said, do you think it ever happened to me? And that really started me thinking, because the fact is that, young Aboriginal Canadians don't have the same chance to get mentored in a business that non-Aboriginal Canadians do, and they certainly don't have the same opportunity to borrow the money. So I thought we would set up a fund that would really get involved in this area. And I went out to 20 Canadian companies, including my own, and basically they said, yes, we agree with you.
How much is in it?
$50 million.
$50 million in the fund.
And what that really shows is that there is tremendous goodwill among Canadian industry wanting to do the right thing, and that's what this fund is all about.
On your brochures, in your textbooks, on your website, you see this word over and over again: entrepreneur, entrepreneurship, independence. Are these all things that this community lacks far too much of?
Well, yes, it is, and it's also something that's very much part of their history. If you take a look at what happened pre-contact, and you had trading routes, you had extensive economic activity going right from the top of North America to the bottom of Tierra del Fuego. The fact is that when the Europeans came, all of this, as a result of disease and as a result of economic might, that was basically destroyed. But Aboriginal Canadians have a great entrepreneurial capacity. You had to, if you were going to be living in the bush all of your life, or if you were trapping, you had to be an entrepreneur. And I think ultimately that gene is there, and what I think we should do is give them a chance to exercise it.
So who can tap into that $50 million fund?
Any young or older Aboriginal who has an idea of a company, the kind of company that they want to build, a venture capital, whether it be wind power. We're involved in a mukluk company, as an example, to simply give you a company that is making mukluks, make very high-end mukluks, and I would recommend to you should buy a couple for your wife, and everybody out there, they should buy a Manitoba mukluk.
Manitoba mukluks, okay. Part two, the Martin Aboriginal Education Initiative. What's that?
Well, we essentially looked, if you look at the high school dropouts in this country, it's just dramatically worse for Aboriginal Canadians. And the reason for that clearly is the underfunding by the federal government of high school and primary school education. Our universities are doing a tremendous job of playing catch up. They've got a way to go, but they're still doing so much better. We have not made the same progress in terms of early learning, in terms of elementary school, or in terms of high school. So we basically said we're going to start to develop a set of programs that are going to essentially give them a chance to play catch up. And that's what we're doing. That doesn't mean that this doesn't solve the underfunding by the federal government of education. When you're underfunding education anywhere from 20 to 40% compared to what non-Aboriginal Canadians receive, you've got a long way to go. What we would like to do is to build the programs that when that funding is properly provided, that in fact we can narrow the gap as much as we possibly can.
I have in my hand here Entrepreneurship 11, which is one of the books of your Aboriginal initiative. And if I were to read this book, if I were a young Aboriginal Canadian and I were to read this book, how would it be any different from the typical textbook I might get in the rest of the school system?
We set up a business program, grades 11 and grade 12, teaching young people about all of what business is all about, from marketing to accounting to entrepreneurship. And we've got courses now going in schools right across the country. But all of the examples when we started off were, of course, non-Aboriginal examples. They were examples we took from the United States or from Canada. We incorporated the business courses from the various provinces. So what we decided was, if you're really going to, there's no reason that young people can't see Aboriginal entrepreneurs as their role models. There's no reason why they can't see the symbolism of the communities in which they grew up as part and parcel of it. So that they would understand very much that the business world is very much their world. It's not somebody else's. It's their world, and they can make their way in it. These are the first textbooks ever written by Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, to the best of our knowledge, anywhere in the world. And we're now getting demands from the Maoris in New Zealand and from people all through the United States for these textbooks. And we've got them in our business courses that are in schools right across Canada.
But I notice on your website you say we got to be careful not to reinvent the wheel here. So what kinds of programs do you offer that make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel? How's it different?
Well, what we did is we took the best business courses that are available right now in Canadian high schools. We took examples from other countries. But then what we did is we took those and we gave them to two of our teachers, and we said, you take them and you adapt them to the values and the traditions and the beliefs that you have. And that's what those textbooks are all about. But I can give you another program. Ontario has a tremendously successful turnaround program for its grade schools. So we took that program and we've gone into two primary schools in southwestern Ontario, on-reserve schools. And we're in the process of adapting that program to those schools, because what's absolutely crucial is that you can benefit from the experience that is outside of the Aboriginal community. But what you've got to do is give Aboriginal education experts the opportunity to take a look at that to see how it applies to their people.
Is all of this enough to overcome what you have identified as a funding gap from the federal government?
Oh, you begin with the funding gap. No matter what it is you do, you know, if I underfund your school by 20 to 40% compared to the school that's down the block, you're not going to have the same quality teachers, you're not going to have science labs, and you're going to have big problems. And that's what we have done. And let's be very clear. That is absolute discrimination. There is no excuse for doing that, to say that one kind of Canadian gets a good school, another kind of Canadian, we're going to underfund their schools. That's the first thing that we have to do. The second thing that we have to do is not to try to impose some kind of a cookie cutter. There are tremendous Aboriginal experts in education out there. And we don't need Ottawa coming in, or any government coming in with their hobnail boots and saying, we're going to tell you what to do. What we've got to do is to go to the Aboriginal experts who are out there in education and say, okay, we're first going to provide decent funding. Second of all, we're going to recognize that there's additional funding for things like fetal alcohol syndrome, all of the outpourings, the derivatives that have come from the residential school problem. And then we go to the existing experts. I can tell you there is more expertise in education in the Aboriginal community than there is in the federal government. And we've got to take advantage of that.
Well, that makes me wonder. The provinces deliver education services to 99% of Canadians, right? Should the federal government get out of this business altogether, just give the money to the provinces and let them do it, since they seem to have the expertise on the ground in this?
I think there has to be a partnership. I don't think that Ottawa should get out of it. It is really the Queen, and it's the Queen in body of Ottawa who is the principal repository of that responsibility. But Ottawa, the provinces, and the territories and the Aboriginal leadership have got to be at the table, and they have got to work this out. That's what Kelowna was all about. That's why Kelowna, walking away from Kelowna 6 years ago by the current government, I don't want to be partisan here, was such a tragedy. Because in fact, for the first time in the history of the country, Ottawa, the province, territories, and the Aboriginal leadership came together. And they said, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, housing, water, and accountability, Let's work up a new paradigm. Let's work together. And that's the only way we're going to solve this.
We should just remind everybody, we have a lot of new Canadians who watch this program. When you were Prime Minister, you negotiated the Kelowna Accord. You have just referred to what it was. The Harper government decided to cancel it. Where would we be today had the government not canceled that Kelowna Accord, in your view?
Oh, we would be 6 years further down solving this problem. And if you want to know how important 6 years is, one of the biggest problems that we have in the elementary schools, where we're operating, is that kids are supposed to know how to read and write by grade 3. And if they haven't learned to read by grade 3, then they start falling behind year after year. Well, grade 3, the 6 years in which we have not put Kelowna into place, what has it meant? It means the kids who went into grade school 6 years ago and who are now suffering because they can't read or write because the schools haven't given it to them, they've virtually lost a lifetime because those kids are going to be behind forever. To take 6 years or 1 year out of your life or my life may not mean much because we've lived for many, many years. To take 1 year out of a 6-year-old child's life is a tragedy. It means that child is going to be suffering from that for the rest of their lives unless there's some way in which you can play catch up. And we're trying to play catch up. But we can't play catch up forever. What we really got to do is to give 6-year-old students, 7-year-old students who are Aboriginal the same chances that your children have had and that my children have had.
So take us a decade down the road. These programs have been in place for 10 years plus. What does Aboriginal Canada look like differently 10 years down the road than it does today?
Well, it looks a great deal better because what it means is that there's a huge degree of hope, that people begin to understand that in fact that life is full of excitement, that there is an opportunity for them that they can do as well as the next person. And 20 years down the road, it's even twice as good. And I think that if we do this kind of thing 25 to 30 years from now, we will have a country with our youngest population that will be full of the excitement of being able to accomplish something, which we will not have a suicide rate which is 8 times worse than the rest of the country. We will have a graduation rate which is equal to the rest of the country. And the proof that that will happen if we do this 10 to 20 years from now is today. That young people who graduate from university, young Aboriginal people who graduate from university do every bit as well. And in fact, the women do better than the non-Aboriginal population. So there's a tremendous opportunity for us out there. Yeah, I think you'll have Aboriginal people creating venture capital companies. I think you'll have huge development in the north where the resources is, and you'll see a lot of those resources being developed by Aboriginal businesses. I think that you'll see doctors, lawyers, people painting the great paintings. I mean, the artistic talent of the Aboriginal community is simply overwhelming. And this is what Canada is all about. You and I have been influenced by Aboriginal Canada far more than you and I understand. And it's part of the DNA of this country. And what we will be doing is we will fulfilling the fundamental values of fairness that we say this country is built on.